Whenever you're ready. Hello and welcome to State Matters. I'm your host, Matt Muratore. A growing number of grandparents are raising their own grandchildren. In fact, in Massachusetts, it's estimated to be over 35,000. So what's being done to support grandparents, and more importantly, what more needs to be done? Joining me for this discussion is the Director of the State Commission on the Status of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, Colleen Pritoni, and the Chair of the local Grandparents Raising Grandchildren group, Phelps. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's really about this really important topic and growing topic. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and learning more about it. But before we start, we always like to know who our guests are. So Ann, we're going to start with you. Give us a little bit about your background.
I have a very multifaceted background.
You do, yeah, I was reading it.
My college majors were in English literature and economics. I have graduate degrees in public policy. I have been involved in social work, town management, teaching, running a learning disability clinic on Cape Cod.
And you live here in Plymouth?
I live here in Plymouth now, raising a 12-year-old granddaughter. I've lived in Syracuse, where I did my graduate work and managed the graduate programs there. And in New York, I was a court-appointed special advocate for neglected and abused children.
Okay. And where did you go to school?
I went to Middlebury and then to the Maxwell School at Syracuse University.
Great. How long have you been in Plymouth?
7 years full-time, and lived on Cape Cod for 15 years.
Ah, okay. So you finally came over the bridge then.
Right.
That's a smart thing to do.
Cape got too expensive.
Yeah, it got too expensive. It's harder to get to. Great. That's great. So, Colleen, why don't we talk about who you are?
Sure. So I am the Director of the Commission on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren.
How long have you been doing that for now?
3.5 years.
Oh, 3 years now.
3.5 years, yeah. And I've been a DCF social worker for almost 20, and on the South Shore. And in my work at DCF, met many grandparents and relative caregivers and facilitated a support group for about 12 years out of the coastal DCF office, which led me to my work with the Commission. And so before my DCF time, I worked at the Norfolk County DA's office doing domestic violence work, and had worked in shelters and things like that. And so my career's been in social work, and I really enjoy what I'm doing now.
And you live in Franklin?
I live in Franklin, yeah.
No grandchildren?
No grandchildren. I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old.
And shout out to your son that's here today.
Yes, he's here today. I went to Boston College, and I got my master's in social work at BC also.
That's great. So what made you decide to go for this job, and why do you think you got the job as the state director?
My very first case at DCF actually was a case of where kids were in DCF custody and were placed with their grandparents. And the grandmother would call often looking for support, looking for some resources. Now this is 18 years ago, well, more, 15, 16, 17 years ago, and really had trouble finding local resources in the community. And so it led me to think, let's think about starting a support group in the area. At the time, there weren't very many. And so I started a support group and just met more and more grandparents. And the department really began to also look closer at placing, when kids came into care, placing kids with family. It's what's appropriate for kids.
Sure.
And so with that also came the trend of and policy changes within DCF, which included placing kids with kinship caregivers. So I think it's almost 50% of foster homes or kinship foster homes at DCF now, which is a significant increase.
So that means that
kids who are in foster care,
yeah,
in foster homes,
that they're in with families that
yep, in kinship foster care, almost 50%.
Are they mostly grandparents with, or could be other?
I don't know the data,
okay.
But I would guess just from my
experience.
experience,
it could be any kinship, though.
It could be any kinship. It could be aunts,
Got
uncles, adult siblings.
Okay.
But it's definitely a growing group of caregivers, both within the department, but also without DCF involvement. There's more and more grandparents who are and relative caregivers who go to probate court, or may even have informal arrangements where they're raising kids.
Right, yeah.
So we're meeting more and more of them as well.
And what we talked off the air about, this 35,000 that I mentioned in the opening, that's probably not even scratching the surface.
No,
There's
I
probably
don't
more
think
out
it
there.
is.
Yeah.
At least a quarter of our group are not there officially through DCF. It may be because of working hours of the parents. In one case, a grandmother took on her junior year granddaughter whose mother had died when the granddaughter was 6 and father had a heart attack and died. So there's military reasons, many different reasons that don't come to the official count, let alone the informal workings of working parents with their
So it's probably a lot higher than 35,000.
I would say it's very much higher.
I agree.
And many people don't wish to come forward.
Yeah. So, Colleen, tell us about the commission on the status of grandparents raising grandchildren. You know, why was it started, and you know, what's its goal and what's it doing now?
Sure. So the commission was established in 2008 by the legislature, and it is a board of volunteer commissioners who are appointed from various state entities, including the Senate, the House, as well as DCF, the Probate Court, Elder Affairs, the Attorney General's Office. And it's an eclectic group of people who, some are grandparents who have raised grandchildren, some are folks who were raised in kinship foster homes or kinship families, as well as service providers, social workers who work very closely with grandparents and relative caregivers. It's a fabulous group. We meet very regularly.
Yeah, how often do you meet?
Once a month. It's the second Wednesday of every month. It's an open meeting. We have information on our website.
How many
for
on the
anyone.
board?
There's about 15 board members. We have various subcommittees, and what we really try to do is provide information, resources, and support to the grandparents and raising grandchildren throughout the state. We do that through community workshops around the state. We do that through trainings for anyone who's interested in starting a support group. We really want to encourage people to have the right information before they start their support groups. We have a website that we try to keep up-to-date information on, so people have, you know, someplace really quick to go to get some information. And we have an annual conference as well, which we just had our 8th annual conference this past June. Over 200 people attended, and it's grandparents, relative caregivers, social workers, attorneys, probation officers. This year we were lucky enough to have Secretary Sutters was at the conference, as well as Joanne Peterson from Learn to Cope, and as well as Governor Baker spoke at our conference this year, and First Lady Lauren Baker was there too. So it was a fabulous event. It's a really good place to come together and listen and learn from each other as well.
And what did the governor have to say?
It was very interesting hearing from the governor. I was very moved, I think, as everyone was, by his remarks. And he started by saying to people, you know, I had a prepared speech. I was going to give you some data and some statistics. And he said, but before I walked in, I heard from some, you know, people had approached him ahead of time and were sharing their stories. And he just spoke about how powerful those stories were for him, and how aware he is, his administration is, around, in particular around the opioid epidemic here in Massachusetts and the impact on families, but also recognizing mental illness as a factor, as Ann mentioned, military deployment, poverty, homelessness. I mean, there's so many factors that really contribute to this, and he really spoke to that, and it was great to have him there. I think people really liked hearing from him.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Ann, you're doing similar work, but on a local level. So tell us what you're doing, and really we need to give a shout out to the previous Senate President Therese Murray, who really got this ball rolling.
Yes.
Right.
And one of the first local grandparents raising grandchildren was started here in Plymouth.
It was.
With Connie DeLego.
With Connie DeLego, who's
you're now
still a
involved.
facilitator with
Yeah.
us.
So tell us, you know, what your group is doing and what your role is.
Well, I came full-time to Plymouth from Syracuse to care for my granddaughter 7 years ago. And that fall, I happened to be in the library and saw a flyer for a support group of grandparents raising grandchildren. And after talking with a five-year-old all day, or in kindergarten, I wanted some adult conversation. So I went and found a wonderful group of people. We have about 50 on our email list. We have about 20 to 24 that come regularly to meetings.
That's great.
Wow.
Men, women, we range in age from early 50s to 80. varying circumstances, as I said earlier. But we support each other. When people come who are new, they're scared silly. They don't know what they're getting into. I hope it's reassuring to hear stories, because no matter what your story is and how different it is in circumstances from people around the table, there's commonality that comes out all the time. It's a place that the grandparents can talk to about their frustration. Not only how to cope with the children, but we've all given up our lives in one way or another.
That Boston Globe article talked about that.
You thought retirement was going to be one thing, but you're starting again. You're often using whatever finances you have to help the situation. You may have to encounter legal things that you don't really know anything about. Raising a child today is not what it was when we raised our own children.
Sure.
It's a very different circumstance.
How old are your own children are?
My daughter, whom I live with, who works pretty much full-time in Boston late at night, is 48, and my granddaughter's 12.
So it's a whole different generation now.
And I don't know if people have kept up with childcare, but it's over $20 an hour.
I own a few
For
babysitting.
You can't afford that.
Yeah. And the one thing the governor is doing too, putting more money into early childhood is care as well. Child care for people, to help offset that. What are some of the top issues that grandparents and relative caregivers reach out to the commission for?
I think, Anne actually just spoke to a lot of them. I think a lot of folks reach out, their families initially in crisis. And so thinking about paying for things like childcare, back to school supplies, winter boots, winter jackets. It's in the back of their mind. They're just doing what they can to get through initially. So I think once the dust settles, sometimes I get a lot of calls from people who are looking for some financial resources. The other thing people call about is, Anne mentioned, legal resources. So these are very complicated cases oftentimes, whether it's DCF involved or at probate court. And so people have a lot of legal questions, and they wonder if they need an attorney, and how am I going to do this? And who works out the visitation? So sort of those legal issues, questions.
And even, should I seek guardianship?
What's the difference?
Is this forever, or is it really just temporary?
Now the child gets an attorney. I think you said this off here. The child gets to get an attorney, but the grandparents don't.
If one goes to court.
If they have to go to court, right.
But
if they don't go to court.
And often the biological parent gets an attorney.
So there's two different legal pathways that most grandparents and relative caregivers experience. When DCF is involved, that's the juvenile court, and that means the department has initiated a care and protection in court. And in those cases, mom will have an attorney, dad will have an attorney, the child will automatically have an attorney, and DCF has an attorney. The grandparents or the foster parents, they don't have attorneys that represent them in the courtroom. For families who on their own may go through probate and family court, mom has a right to an attorney, dad has a right to an attorney, child has a right to an attorney, but someone needs to request the attorney. So whereas in juvenile court, it's automatic.
Got it.
In probate court, someone needs to request the attorney for the child. And remembering that's the child's attorney. But again, the only one who doesn't have a right to an attorney is the grandparent or the relative caregiver. So they'll be in a courtroom with all the attorneys advocating on their client's behalf, and then family members are stuck and overwhelmed and stressed, and it's their adult child they're in court with, so it's very complicated. But so the legal process is very stressful for people. And then there's issues down the road, other legal questions, like what if something should happen to me? What will happen to my grandchild? Healthcare proxies, things like that in the beginning aren't necessarily first thing on people's minds. So we do get a lot of legal questions. I'm not an attorney, and I'm always very clear to explain that to people, and we do have a list of some legal resources, but it's certainly not enough,
Yeah,
I would say.
right.
And just the other thing I would mention is a lot of people do reach out, as Ann mentioned, for support. They may not realize that's what they need at the time. They may start attending a support group looking for information, and it morphs into really support and information groups. That's how I found them to be in a lot of the feedback. So my advice to people is always, number one, is to get connected to a support group in your community.
Like the one Ann's running, yeah.
They have a fabulous group.
And what are some of the first questions? Somebody new coming to your support group, what are some of the first questions that they ask or they're looking for?
Is this really the rest of my life?
Really?
It can be very difficult to understand that this isn't going to end in all likelihood. The initial hope often is that if there's addiction, the biological parent or parents will straighten up and be able to take their children back.
That's the wish.
It's the hope.
And the hope.
And it often is that person's reality. This isn't the child I raised, it's temporary. Surely this is only a temporary situation. So the realization when it dawns that this is a whole change, there are people who literally can't handle it. I remember one woman about 5 years ago who came. She had just retired from 40 years of teaching and was given a newborn baby. 1 month later, she said, I cannot do this. And the guilt was horrendous.
Sure. Because the option is what?
Give it to the state or the system if there is no other family willing to take the child in. We have a case that we were talking about before of a couple in the group. They have a 14-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy. The same daughter, biological mother, gave up the rights to the boy, but has not to the 14-year-old daughter. They've just spent $30,000 over 3 years to get permanent guardianship.
And there was no legal support from the state to help them?
No. And he himself is a lawyer in a very different area. He said he had never seen anything so convoluted.
Well, Ann, what are some of the major challenges that grandparents face when they come to the group? What are some of the things they're saying that are real issues?
Their own health, depending on age or circumstance. We have several in the group who are caring for 90-year-old very ill parents, as well as the grandchildren. Finances. Can I afford to do this? My own granddaughter grew quite a bit last year and went through 4 clothing sizes within a little over a year. That all adds up.
Are you working yourself?
No, I've retired.
Do you see some grandparents actually go back to work?
We have
part-time jobs as well?
Grandparents who had to give up their professional job and take either a part-time job or a job with the local schools or something lesser than what they were doing. The other issue that people don't think about, there can be a real loss of your immediate family. Also, you've lost the child's biological parents or parent. If you, as the grandparent, have other children, your attention to that grandchild may take away from your ability to see the other grandchildren or your other children. So there can be a lot of resentment built up. And then you have, we have a number of grandparents where the mother or the father or both have died from an overdose or from natural causes. So there are huge issues. Yeah,
sure. Colleen, what are some other services for these grandparents or caregivers out there for them?
So for families who may be involved with DCF and who are the foster parents, the kinship foster parents have the same access to resources as other foster parents. So foster care stipends, the child will receive mass health. They have access to other, services that DCF can help put in place, like WIC, early intervention, wraparound therapeutic services in the home. There's a team at DCF who will help identify and implement services on behalf of the family, as long as DCF is involved, including childcare.
But in a case where grandparents are just raising and DCF is
So
not
when
involved.
families are not involved
So
with
versus not
DCF, that's
involvement,
the
yeah.
big discrepancy.
Yeah.
You don't have the service.
No, so for
Yeah.
families who may have received custody through probate court, guardianship through probate court, there are some. It's definitely limited. So families can go to the Department of Transitional Assistance, to DTA, and apply for what they refer to as a child-only grant. And we have all this information on our website. And essentially, it's the grandparent is applying for the child to help receive, a stipend to help care for them. And the grandparent's income is not factored in to determine eligibility for the grant. The child's income is. Most kids do not have income, but if they're on disability or if they receive survivor benefits or something like that, they'll be factored in for sure. So that's a small amount of money that can help. The grandparent does have to consent to allow DTA to work with the Department of Revenue for any potential child support issues. And so for some families,
So they have to, if the parents
they have
allow
to
it to go
consent.
after that, they have to go after the
correct,
parents
to
and
see,
collect money.
right.
If there is
And
any.
if there is any. And so for some
and if there's
families,
any income with them.
right. And so for some families, they're fine
Yeah,
with that. And
yeah.
other families, for different reasons, they may not be comfortable with that.
Because of the emotional detachment of losing your child
Right,
as well.
or someone
yeah.
might be in recovery, new to
Yeah,
recovery,
right.
just started a job, or who knows, I don't know. There's many issues that come up for that. One change that did come in May of 2019, which is quite significant, I want to make sure I mention it, is that DTA had a major policy change, which now for families who receive this child-only grant, if the grandparent or relative caregiver is working, they're now eligible for a referral for childcare. That is
Huge.
huge.
That's one of the calls we should get a lot is
Yes.
that, look at it.
Right.
If my child was DCF, they would get into childcare free, basically,
Exactly.
but now they
Right.
can't. So this is huge.
So this is
then.
huge. This
Yeah.
is huge. This is we're so excited about this. The commission
So you
really
say the grandparents
advocated.
need to be working?
They need to be working. So
Okay,
it's not
yeah.
income. They don't have to
Yep.
prove income. They have to show proof of employment.
Okay.
And
Part-time, full-time?
I don't know exactly what
okay,
the hours
okay,
are, but
okay.
I don't know that I don't know how strict it is.
Yeah, okay.
But they have to be employed. Not walking their neighbor's dog
Yeah, right,
necessarily,
yeah,
but have a
sure,
job
sure.
and proof of employment, and they can be referred for childcare. Which so this just rolled out in
nice,
May, and
nice.
so we're really excited to make sure that we're sharing that information,
Nice.
and to see how many people are able to access this resource.
Sure.
As Ann mentioned, a lot of grandparents, they range in age. So you could have grandparents in their 40s, grandparents, as you mentioned, 80. Many are working and they want to continue to work.
Yeah.
But if you have a child come to you in the middle of the night on a weekend, or some crisis has happened, and you're trying to figure out how to go to work in a couple of days, who's going to take care of
Yeah,
these kids?
sure.
It's really beneficial for everyone, not only for the caregiver, but it's really good for the kids to be in an appropriate and safe setting too, so the grandparent can work. So we're really excited about that.
Is there any pending legislation that's out there that could help grandparents raising their grandchildren?
There is. So there was a bill filed by Representative Donato. I believe you have signed on that as well.
He's a member of the
Commission, yes.
yeah.
He's an original founding member
Yeah,
of the
great
Commission
guy.
on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. And there's a bill filed to require judges to appoint attorneys on these custody hearings for grandparents and relative caregivers, for indigent grandparents and relative caregivers. Right now, it's my understanding that the SJC has a ruling that they shall. We would like them to do it,
Yeah,
to
right,
appoint
yeah.
attorneys for grandparents and relative caregivers because of all the things Ann
Sure.
had mentioned and we already discussed.
That would be huge. if
That would be
could happen,
huge.
yeah.
And again, it's a cracking the door open to
right,
potential
right,
further legislation,
yeah.
but I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and what are some, what does the Plymouth Support Group hope to accomplish?
I think two goals mainly. we hope to strengthen the people who come to be able to endure and raise the grandchild as time goes on, have support, know what to do, and be much more comfortable themselves in handling issues as they come up. And one big issue can be the schools, who look as grandparents as, well, you're not the parent, but you really are the parent now. So helping people break through the school barriers and advocate in school for their children needs as time goes on. We hope to be able to get them correct information.
Right.
If we work among a number of different departments within the state, we may get very conflicting answers depending who you talk to on a given day, even within one department. So we hope to give them good information or send them to people who can provide them or get them help if they need it. The other thing we're trying to do is advocate with the state, such as yourself and other people, on funding. There is money to send children to camp or sports events or do things, but there's no money to pay for the grandparent to take a week off.
Right, yeah.
Or have some time off. So we're looking for avenues. This year, the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, estimated it's over $232,000 to raise a child from 0 to 18.
I can buy $6. I can believe that.
Exclusive of college.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Oh my
And we're
God.
taking on that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. We only have a minute left, but how many support groups are there in Massachusetts, do you think?
So there's about 45 to 50 support groups around the state.
Yep.
We're always hoping to increase that number. We have a list of the support groups on our website.
And what is
listed
your
by
website?
town. It is massgrg.com. And we do have a list of all the support groups. I do just want to mention real quick, the commission was very grateful to receive a grant from Massachusetts Councils on Aging for this fiscal year for FY20 to be able, and one of our programs is going to be able to support the support groups. So helping them plan, they can apply for a grant for intergenerational activity for the grandparents and the grandchildren, as well as some sort of hidden costs that it comes with running a support group. So stay tuned.
Excellent. And Ian, when are your support groups? They're at the Center for Active Living. When are
They're
they?
at the Center for Active Living every Thursday from 10
In
to
Plymouth.
12:30
10 to 12:30.
in Plymouth.
Perfect.
And
Every
people come
Thursday.
from all over.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you both
Thank
very
you.
much for
Thank
what
you
you
for
do
having us.
and what you continue to do, and keep working with us as legislators to help advance this cause even further. Thank you so much at home for watching. We hope you found this program informative and helpful. Thank you to the staff, the volunteers at PAC TV, and of course, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on State Matters.